Yeah, hi. I'm currently in Germany on my vacation and don't really have a video for you, but I do have an old video of me doing some wheel building for my bike. So I figured let's just edit that and upload it. So have fun, hope you enjoyed the video, and see you in roughly a week. So this is my Velo Mobile. It's a enclosed recumbent bike, and it has 3 wheels, 2 front wheels and 1 back wheel. And one of the issues with these bikes is that if you corner these wheels, they get a lot of sideways forces. Like usually on a normal bike, well, don't really have normal bikes, but on a regular 2-wheeled bike, when you lean into a corner, the forces on your wheels stay perpendicular. But on these bikes, they don't lean in corners, so the bike just stays upright, but it has to, like, the wheels have to compensate these very large turning forces. So you kind of get pretty quick spoke breakage. And when a spoke breaks, your rim starts to deform slightly, and if many spokes break, then eventually you'll get such large stresses that your rim deforms permanently. So what I'm doing here is I am respoking my wheels one at a time. I took off that wheel, my right front wheel, and I'm going to replace it with these very deep rims. And this is the actual hub that the rim is going to be spoked on. And in this video, basically, I'm just going to show you a couple of tips on how to respoke a wheel, how to do wheel building for pros. Now, the first thing you'll likely have to do, and I didn't record that unfortunately, is you have to remove your hub from your old rim. And well, obviously the hub is connected to the rim with spokes. They're connected with these little spoke nipples, and that doesn't sound right. So in order to remove these nipples from the spokes, often the spoke actually protrudes slightly through the center of the nipple. So you cannot use just a flat screwdriver for that. So for that, I highly recommend just grinding down a standard flat screwdriver to this like U shape to go around the little bit of exposed spoke. And that way you can just use an electric screwdriver to really quickly delace your wheels. Now once you've done that and you have calculated your required spoke length, you're gonna have to either buy spokes or make them yourself. So I have many bikes that need new wheels, or well, they don't necessarily need new wheels, but I think of something, I want new kinds of hubs. I rebuild a couple of wheels a year, and buying the spokes outright, they're like 50 cents to €1 a piece. It gets really expensive very quickly. So I like to thread them myself, which means you can use old spokes as long as they're oversized. You just take your old spoke, you use a special spoke cutter. These are like piano wire cutters, so very strong hardened steel beak cutters. You cut them to length. Make sure to measure them from the like the imaginary line going through the butt, not from the actual end, because you'll be like a millimeter off. Cut them to length, and then I have one of these Hosan spoke threaders. So this is a spoke thread cutter, and a cutter is kind of the wrong word. They roll the thread onto the spoke. So I have a spoke to be threaded in here. It's held down by this thingamajig, and this head, it can turn, and it will roll these dies around the spoke, and it will force the material down, kind of force some of the material inwards and some outwards to form a thread. And this way, if you would actually use cutting tools, the thread would be very weak, because you're cutting into the material and you're kind of cutting into the grain and creating all kinds of ways for the thread to break. You don't want that. By rolling it into the spoke, you actually create a thread that is stronger than the rest of the spoke, so you get a much better quality fitting, and the spoke will have a much longer lifetime. I highly recommend just using a proper spoke thread. They're kind of expensive. They're like 120 euros was this one. They come with a hand operated handle, which is ridiculous. You should never use it. Just hook it up to your favorite power tool, and you can just there you go. You can just thread it like that. Right, I'm done threading all my spokes. If this is the first time that you're actually thinking about how to thread your spokes, you're probably too late, because you've already made your spokes. But it's really important to think about the type of pattern that you're going to make your spokes. So, for instance, so here is a random wheel. Actually, in the background there's another wheel. You can see in the pattern of these spokes that if you follow the spoke outwards, you can see how many times it crosses another spoke on the same flange side. So if we follow this spoke actually it crosses this spoke, because it's very hard to actually see that. So we follow this spoke, it crosses this spoke only barely, and then another spoke, and then a third spoke, until it finally ends at the nipple. And this is what we call a 3-cross pattern. And you can pretty much do this with any wheel. You can look at any wheel and look. So, for instance, just take a look here. You take this. Again, it only barely crosses the first spoke, second spoke, third spoke. And with only one exception, I think, all the wheels that I built myself are 3-cross. And there's a reason for this. 3-cross is stronger in the sense that the more crosses you have, the more, like, if you can imagine a perfectly radially spoked wheel. So if this wheel were perfectly radially spoked, that means that it's a 0 cross. So each spoke would go directly to the rim. So if there is a force on the rim and the spoke is slightly pushed down, it is actually pushed down by quite a large amount, because the spokes are shorter, so every little bit of indentation of your wheel is going to directly affect the spoke underneath. If there are more crosses, each spoke is actually like at a more oblique angle to the rim, which means that in practice you distribute the load over more spokes. So a higher cross count will make a stronger wheel, a wheel that causes sudden loads to be distributed over more spokes. Now the downside to this is that actually a wheel with more crosses, so especially large wheels, I think people go up to like 5 cross. So these spokes on these large wheels, they're like perfectly tangential or even kind of cross downwards on the hub. And on these really extremely crossed patterns, one of the issues you have is that the wheel becomes very springy. So because your load is distributed over so many spokes, there's not a lot of rigidity in it. And for something like my Villa Mobile, which has to be able to withstand these large forces, what are called dishing forces. I cannot really afford to have a super springy wheel, so I kind of want to make it the least amount of springiness that still has some strength to absorb shocks. Also, it's not really that important to absorb shocks because I have a shock absorber in my spring system, so I can afford the wheel to be a little bit more rigid and still have a good overall performance and not really have problems with spokes breaking when I hit a curb or something. So whereas my previous wheel was a 3-cross, now I'm going to build a 2-cross. And as with pretty much everything, preparation is your most important thing with wheel building. And here I always like to start with the uppermost spokes. So in this case, the spokes that go through the flange in that direction and then go upwards. This way I get like a wheel that's easier to build. It kind of floats by itself, it doesn't sag while building. And very important is the orientation. So these are trailing spokes, which means they kind of angle away those directions from the flange. And that means that this will be a trailing spoke, one spoke on the other side will be a trailing spoke, and then I will have 2 leading spokes. So here, near the hole for the tire valve, the spokes will be going outwards, so you have enough room to put your pump on the valve. If you don't do this correctly, especially on these tiny wheels, you will not have enough room to put your pump in and you won't be able to inflate your tires. I've now put in 9 spokes on the top, 9 spokes on the bottom, all in the same direction. And now it's time to put in the first spoke in the other direction. So what I did, I spooled up, so I kind of rotated the hub in the correct direction with regards to the rim. And now we're going to put in the first spoke here. Ooh, that's actually the wrong way around. Should be like that. And now we need to make sure that we're actually going to do the 2-cross. So what you can see here, spoke starts here, crosses one spoke, crosses a second spoke, and then on the rim itself you need to make sure that you get one spoke from the left side and one from the right side flange. So this hole here will be a left side and this can be a right side flange. So we're going to put the spoke into there and put in the nipple and do the same for the other side, and that's basically everything done as far as the non-truing part is concerned. Alright, so all the spokes have been laced in, and now comes the kind of very long-winded process of truing the wheel. And truing involves 2 things. If I spin the wheel around, you can see it kind of wobbles in different ways. It wobbles, fundamentally, it wobbles in this way, so you can see this side going left and right, and it wobbles up and down. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to tighten all the nipples to a certain position, just like tighten them finger tight essentially. And then I'm going to fix this wobble first, which is called the height wobble, and then after that I'm going to do the lateral wobble. I tighten all the nipples, it's a fun word. I put some fixed reference here next to the wheel so I can see exactly how much the rim is moving as it's turning. And basically the first thing I do is I want to get this height wobble out. So everywhere where it's further away from the hub, I'm going to tighten the nipples a little bit more, and if it gets further away, I'm going to loosen them. And that should get rid of it pretty soon. Hey, the lighting has changed. Anyway, if you've come here to get a detailed tutorial on how to build a wheel, this is not it. There is, many people tend to ask, especially on the Wheel Builders forum and Sheldon Brown and that kind of sites, what's the secret to really good wheel building? Well, there is really no secret. If you're a machine, you can build a wheel very quickly, but if you're a human, there's really only one way, and that is adjusting spoke tension one at a time to try and fix every last bit of wobble until it's under like 0.5 millimeter, and you can't really tell it's wobbling anymore. That's really it. It's just a very tedious process, and that's it, pretty much. And then, of course, the last question that people generally ask when building a wheel is, when should I stop truing? So at what point is my wheel straight enough? And I generally say, well, about 0.5 millimeter of, so that's 1/50th inch, maybe 1/64th. That's roughly when you should stop truing, because there are two things happening. First, if you build your own wheel, when it's in the truing stand, if you have a proper truing stand, or if you're doing it the getaway like I'm doing, those spokes, they will set themselves further as you ride on your bike. They will like kind of slide past each other and straighten out, and when there are shocks, they will set themselves in the spoke holes and all that kind of stuff. Over the first like 100-200 kilometers, the wheel will kind of go out of alignment anyway, and that will actually have a much larger impact than that 0.5 millimeter. So it really doesn't make any sense to try to do it better than that. Also, your tire itself, tires, especially specialty tires, the types that I usually ride on, they're partly handmade, which means that you get pretty large variations in the actual diameter. So if of course now it's not inflated, but you see kind of hot bubbles up and down. When I inflate it, there will still be quite a lot of variation, both sideways and in height. So I usually stop at like 1 millimeter if it's really hard. Like right now, I do actually have about 1 millimeter sideways sway, which is kind of a lot, but I don't really care that much. And in the other direction, it's less than 0.5 millimeter, so I'm happy with that. So here's one of these long spokes protruding from the nipple, and this is really where this bit comes in handy. It just goes around the spoke. Oop.